Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the exam on Monday. I think that's a weird way to say it, but I'm sure you got through it. And we are now leaving social science. So, as I have been talking about in advising, this course 350 is the intro to all the different types of methodologies that we utilize in the communication discipline. And you just spent that time in social science. If you're saying, I like that, I got it, I'd like to know more about that, and survey and big data analysis. Maybe you're thinking on the marketing side and working with a lot of data. Certainly, quantitative methods, COMM 420, would be the course you would take. However, not everybody is into analyzing quantitative and social science data, so there are other methods available if that was not your kind of cup of tea, shall we say. And we're going to be moving into now the interpretive. And the interpretive is going to be fueled mostly by a specific type. It's qualitative research, as you already know, and it's stories. And one of the ways that we look at stories is through ethnography. And so you may have noticed in those classes you have to take next, of course, you have the quantitative methods, social science, but you have a whole class in ethnography. And that's essentially your interpretive paradigm methods class. So we're going to take a look at ethnography. This is generally fairly popular with our majors. So I'll tell you a whole lot more about it today. And I have a great video I want to share with you because I think it encapsulates what interpretive and ethnography is. So before we start with that little video, again, we're talking about ethnography. And it looks at, don't worry, I'm going to come back to this slide, but people's experiences. And what can we learn from people's stories and experiences? And so again, I have a little video that I really enjoyed watching, mostly because I'm probably a big fan of this musical group. If you're not, don't worry. But I want you to kind of tap into what he's saying about the power of story and what we can learn from it.
My wife's best friend is from the Republic of Georgia. So through this friend, I ended up hearing these stories about this taxi driver. She's probably the only female taxi driver in that area. She's sort of been a hardened woman by life. The way she carries herself, she's strong, she's tough. She, at a young age, falls in love and is going to be thinking she's going to marry this guy. And at the same time, her dad passes away unexpectedly. And so she's mourning the loss of her dad. And in the midst of all this, in bad timing, her boyfriend asks her to marry him. She doesn't give him an answer because she's mourning the loss of her dad. After being rejected, from this marriage proposal, he leaves and never comes back. And she notices that he tracked out these muddy footprints on her floor, on her carpet, and she refuses to wash any of them off. And it got me really interested in this story. I imagined, well, why does she keep them? If I was her, what I would keep those around for. Each verse is sort of an era in her life. And it starts as this young, optimistic woman who is going to get married and her life's going to be amazing. And it kind of evolves and devolves. The name Cleopatra is important. I think that's why it became the title track to the album. It sort of embodies this idea more than it is, this isn't this person's name. This is this idea that when we're young, we feel, I think, a lot of us like we're destined for something bigger than our small town, or destined for greatness or something. For this person who ended up feeling like she was late for this, late for that, late for the love of her life, and then she's going to die alone, I think she started the same way we all start, which is feeling that way. And it doesn't always go according to that plan. When I talked to her, she said, the two best days of my life were when I got my divorce and when I had my only son. And it's the opposite of what I've heard almost anyone tell me about their lives. I felt like the courage in confronting what your life was really like, it was so rare to hear and see. And I think that is a big part of the song. For me, the big focus was on sort of honoring that. The last verse takes it into this idea that she's walking through, in my head, she was walking through a nursing home telling a nurse how great she was as a person, as a woman. She had all these dreams. She was taller than the rafters. She was this force. She was Cleopatra. And I imagine the nurse kind of saying, I'm sure you were, I'm sure you were. Because the younger generation is always sort of, we're looking at ourselves and we think everyone else is kind of over and crazy. I think the best way we learn from each other and actually are open to change is through telling of stories. It's not through arguments, it's not through statistics. Telling stories about characters, and that's Cleopatra's a character to me, that you're trying to tell her story throughout these verses.
Okay, so just a little intro into the telling of stories. And I don't know that I can agree with Wesley Schultz that stories are better than statistics. There's ways we learn in this world through both methodologies. Obviously, that's the whole point. But what I thought was a very moving story. And I think what happens in ethnography is when we can relate to other people's stories and we see trends, that's what becomes important. And I think he hit on a big one there, that the young always say, this is going to be great. And as you get older, it doesn't always go as planned. And when multiple people can relate to that story, there's something there for us to take a look at that says something about life and about people. So let me go back to this side proper and start defining some terms. These are in your text, but ethnography is in the interpretive paradigm. It is one of the major ways that qualitative or interpretive studies are carried out. And it stems from ethnomethodology. And this comes out of sociology and a little bit of anthropology as well. But we're trying to explain and interpret how people engage in social situations and go about making sense of their lives and other people's behaviors. In COMM 300, you're actually learning theories that would support ethnography. So for instance, expectancy violations or uncertainty reduction, these are all theories that look at why do people behave the way they do. And so we become very much that anthropologist or sociologist or communication scholar now, looking at the way people behave. And instead of giving them a survey about their behavior, again, we are going to talk to them or observe them. And ethnography says we're really going to look at it from the native point of view. We're going to take ourselves out of the picture and observe and try to understand why people do what they do and think how they think. We can develop theories, as I was mentioning with the video, for example. There could be a theory where we have a grandiose simplex or complex or something early in life where we think our lives are going to be much more grandiose than they are, and that actually influences our actions early on. And certainly if we saw that as a pattern, think about theory. Theory is something that explains patterns of behavior. So what we talk about in ethnography is grounded theory. By developing these relationships and trying to explain the way people behave, as we see patterns reoccurring, we start developing a theory grounded in behavior. Thus, we call that grounded theory. That's how we come about theory. We don't look at statistics or charts or probabilities, but we do look at theories that are systematically told over and over, or behaviors that happen over and over again, that we can then say this is a theory. Naturalistic inquiry. Again, how do people actually behave when they're absorbed in genuine life experiences? Oftentimes we don't behave how we think we would. And so I think ethnography also tries to get at kind of that real life experience. So for instance, this could be an interesting story if you were to interview people who ever had their house robbed while they were home. Now, how you think you will act and what actually happens are two different things. And that's, again, where you want that kind of naturalistic, how did people act? And I don't know if you have ever been home when your house was robbed, but I was. And I was 17, maybe 16. I can't remember quite exactly, but I had been out back swimming. I was home alone in swimming in our pool, and and two men broke into our house. Well, of course, you would think I would run or go to a neighbor or call somebody. No. Mm-mm. When I came back into the house, still kind of dripping wet in my swimsuit with my towel on, I said to the two strange men coming out of my parents' bedroom, I walked right up to them and said, "What are you doing here?" And of course, they said nothing, tucked my mom's jewelry box, which at the time I thought it was maybe a radio, or so. I couldn't figure out what they was under the man's arm, but he said nothing and ran out the front door. And then what did I do next? I followed them. I might not have been the brightest 17-year-old, but I followed them. I did notice, obviously, that the front door was all bashed in and wood splintered everywhere, and it clicked. What are they doing? They're robbing you. And I got very lucky, obviously, that they never came back in the house and the police showed up, all that good stuff. But I guess what I'm getting at is we really want how people genuinely react to life experiences, to try to understand better what happens when we're in them, because we can plan for certain life experiences and look at how others acted, but we really, we never know. So we really try to dig deeper in ethnography and get to that genuine life experience. There are two different types um, that we study. We look at ethnographers of speaking and ethnographies of communication. And I'm going to share both of those with you. Of course, they are certainly just techniques that we've parsed out. So we'll start with the ethnography of speaking. And I want to give you the page number in your textbook on this one, because I think this is a very good chapter, and you will definitely want to check the ethnography chapter out in your textbook. It's well done. So, Ethnography of Speaking by Himes, 1962, looks at these key elements. It says, what is the scene and the setting that is worthy of description? Who are the participants? And it goes through and kind of sets out all of the key parts that we need. Chapter 13, okay, is your ethnography chapter. And remember, this is a method for describing particularly culturally distinct communication practices. We want to know. I put the Friends Cafe in here because this actually became part of our culture. Coffee houses and even memes and language. I mean, if you were a Friends watching generation, don't know how many of you still watched that, we became to know what meant. And that's a whole cultural phenomenon happening right here. So again, I wanted to point out it's on 239 that they go through describing all of these: the scene, the setting, the participants. The end is the goal. What are they trying to achieve? I mean, really, they're trying to achieve friendship and life. The act, the structure, the topic of the messages, a lot of their messages are around friendship and love and family. So we can look at that. The key is the tone or the instrumentalities or the modes of communication. And really, one of the key instrumentalities that came out of this show was the notion of the coffee house, and that's where you meet people who are your friends. Their norms of interaction, the coffee house is the place that they catch up. And even the category or the genre, this would be humor. So this is a quick way to look at and say, how can we examine or observe people? And this is what we would do. So if I wanted to observe, even in the classroom, I could observe a Zoom classroom and see what's happening. It's actually already happening because the scene and the setting is Zoom. It sucks. Who are the participants? You, the students, me, the teacher. What is our goal? To learn something and get a degree and get through this. How do we act? Well, most of our messages are very formal in one way, which is sad. They only come from me. You also turn off all your cameras and go to sleep. So, again, the key or the tone of the communication, it's straight lecture. I love cracking jokes and playing off things in the classroom. Um, there was a student one day and I asked him, well, what do you prefer to be called? And he said, whatever. And so all semester, everyone in the class called him whatever. And, those kinds of things were definitely missing, that kind of key tone and the way things are delivered. The classroom was a different culture, but how are things now delivered in this Zoom setting? I feel like most students feel safe with the chat. And I love when you put even personal comments in the chat. Someone told me the other day, I like your shirt. And it was like, cool, we need that if we're going to build any kind of relationship. And we kind of know that from previous grounded theory in ethnography. Um, we have developed certain norms. As I said, for most of you, it's turn your camera off, turn your mic off. If you need anything at all, go to the chat. So even I've developed norms. It's difficult, and we are more like just a lecture or video. So it's ethnography of speaking. It explains distinct cultural communication practices in a setting by using these elements. Then we have the ethnography of communication. I want to go back to that real quick here because it doesn't have a whole structured way of looking at something like ethnography of speaking does. It's referred to as EOS. But the ethnography of communication focuses on particular speech communities and particular settings. So we will be talking more about this because this ethnography of communication is much more general. It can look at any kind of speech patterns of a group or a setting. And this is often fun. I often tease debaters. If anyone here, I don't know if anyone in this is doing speech and debate, great activity. I spent years in it and also coached speech and debate. And what's fascinating to me about speech and debate is they have their own particular language. So we can talk about running a T or turning an argument, or that's a voter, or you might ask somebody at a speech and debate tournament, did you break? And these, you have no idea what I'm talking about unless you're in speech and debate. And that's kind of fascinating too, to be able to study a particular community or a particular setting and look at the communication and language and speech that they use. I learned that even the homeless population has its own particular language that they use. So if someone's talking about where their flop is, that's probably where they're sleeping that night. And this just gives us some more insight into language and particular groups of real life experiences and what other people are going through the language they choose. All right, so that's ethnography of speaking, very structured cultural way of looking at it. Ethnography of communication, much more open to just looking at the speech patterns of particular groups and their language. Ethnography also evolved into autoethnography. So yes, it is acceptable to publish your own autoethnography, your genuine lived experience. So if I have been through a particular experience, that story in and of itself may very well be research and publication worthy. And we know this because of autobiographies. They are people's stories. And when we hear people's stories and when we relate to them, that's when we get meaning and we start to understand certain things. So autoethnography is one person's story. And yes, we call a lot of those sometimes in the journal articles, when you see ethnography, it might be called a case study with what we say, forgive my statistical nature, with an N of one. It's just one person telling you about their experience. So I've had master's students who have done autoethnographies where they told about their experience being in prison and what that was like and what that speech community was like. Very fascinating. I had another autoethnography that looked at this man's experience coming out and what he went through. And I'm sure that that story and that autoethnography resonates with a lot of other folks as well. We even have in our department courses in performance ethnography. And this takes things a step further. It really takes ethnography and people's stories and it puts them on the stage. And so our performance ethnography professor, Dr. Lindemann, has been transitioning into a dean's role. So I don't know how much more we will have performance ethnography as a course, but you would be performing. If you take performance ethnography, expect to be on a stage and performing a story, your story, someone else's story, part of the story. I also have another YouTube video here. You can see that I've got queued up. I think this is a little bit of a performance ethnography with a twist, and I really like it. I think it's incredibly powerful, and again, gets to the statistics is powerful, but this is powerful in a different way.
Did you know memory foam was developed in 1966? That's 10 years older than VHS.
Excuse me. Oh, here we go.
There she was like a picture. There she was just the same. There she was, he just had to know that she had forgot his name. Ole, ole, oh. Thinking back to the last time on the wall as they turned away. Walking back, was it just a dream or did he hear her say? Ole, ole, oh. Tried his best to forget her. Tried his best to just keep his stride. Kept his word, but he knows he lied. Ole, ole, oh. Ole, ole, oh. There she was like a picture. There she was just the same. There she was, he just had to know she had not forgot his name. Ole, ole, oh.
Okay, so another powerful video always gets me. So hard not to, I think, have some emotion after that. So What a powerful story. Right now, I want to Google what happened to Marina and Ule after they met back in 2010. Did they see each other after that? I don't know. I gotta find out. Okay, I got it together, folks. But in a way, they took their entire love story, and you can see the years. I mean, the first thing she does is smile. He shows so much like, wow, I can't believe I'm seeing you. He shows, I think, some regret in his face. Um, Many of you don't know, I used to teach for us at State nonverbal communication on a regular basis. And to me, it's all the people she sits with for a minute and their faces just in that moment of silence, I think, give you information and give you story. Okay. So that is performance ethnography. If you do take a course in performance ethnography, make sure you know what you're getting into. All right. So we do make claims in interpretive research. And by that, I basically mean we still make research questions. And remember back at the beginning when I said we usually are making more of a research question that looks at how someone experiences something. We're not trying to find out how two variables affect each other, which again, very important, but totally different type of knowledge. So usually in interpretive, remember when I said we were learning qualitative research, I said generally it's going to be small numbers. And I think some of you were freaking out that I said 20 was a small number, but it is. Generally, we're dealing with maybe, it could be one person, but 3 to 12. And we're looking for a system of shared meaning. That's what language is. It's how we share meaning. And so we even call it how we build this web of significance through what we say. Actually, it was very interesting. We just read a research article that talked about the use of language by Democrats versus Republican. Do we use a different language or say different words? And the answer was absolutely yes. So Republicans and Democrats experience in some way, whether that's learned or through their use. You can read the whole article. I'll send it to you if you want. But we do seem to differ in our web of significance and how we interpret things, which also I would garner leads to the way we see the world differently. So again, any speech community is a group that shares rules for using or interpreting speech. And I've already given you a few shared groups. Democrats apparently share a language system. I've also done a lot of research because I've cut back on it because I don't want to get dinged for it, but I used to swear a lot. Yeah, I dropped the big old F-bombs in the classroom. Um, is there a difference between people who swear a lot and those who do not in the way they see the world and their language? There is. I would garner there is. There's lots of research studies that actually, they say people who swear a lot are actually much more intelligent. That's what I'm going with. But I've actually cut way back so as not to be offensive on camera. The communal function, again, how do we create even identity? I see this as a huge part of what's happening with your generation and even the millennials, and even calling them millennials and putting a tag on them. A lot of people will say we can look to, and this is another theory you might learn about in COMM 300, uses and gratifications, that we turn to the media a lot of times for them to tell us who our identity should be, that I should wear makeup if I'm a female, I should have long hair and I should be skinny. If you're a guy, you should have muscles. And, we look to other communication sources, communal sources, to say how we should be and form an identity. Sometimes we engage in code switching, mixing the rules of one speech mixing the rules of one speech community with the rules of another. And it talks a little bit about this notion of code switching on 243. I would also love for you to look at the research questions on 243. Notice that interpretive and ethnography generally sticks to research questions. Because we are not looking at specific variables and how they affect one another, we don't necessarily see hypotheses as much. They can exist, but we still have research questions we're trying to find. So on 243, they do give you those research questions. we'll look more at this notion of code switching, but certainly people who speak a variety of languages, you probably already know this, there's some words that just are not translatable in other languages. There's no meaning, there's no specific interpretation. And so it becomes very difficult when we've got to integrate different rules into one speech community and what they've learned. All right, this is where we are then going to stop at this point. I think this is a fairly short lecture for you because the next part of what we are going to get into in ethnography is the interviewing part. Believe it or not, just like in the social science method, and there's specific steps to scientific research, there are actually very specific steps to interviewing someone. And so that's where we're going to go next. The next video will be about how to conduct a good interview so that you can get that story out. And if you've ever watched interviews on TV, some interviewers are very bad at it and some are much better. If you're an ethnographer, that is a skill you have to have. It has to be one where you can relate to people and really get them to share with you. And that's what you want in your interviewing skills. And we'll talk a little more about how to do that on the next ethnography lecture, pre-recorded lecture. So that is it for now. I hope you're enjoying a new switch. You have social science now, and now you have your interpretive ethnography. The last one we will be explaining, by the way, is the critical and cultural. So if you did sign up for that methods course, don't worry, that's coming too. But I will catch you next time on Storytelling 101 Ethnography, and we'll talk about interviewing.